This is Jonathan Ferguson, the Keeper of Firearms and Artillery at the Royal Armouries Museum in the UK, which houses a collection of thousands of iconic weapons from throughout history. And on this episode, he's taking a look at some of the British weaponry of the World War II-era shooter, Hell Let Loose.
I don't think I'm making this up, but I would have known that was a Lewis gun just from the sound effect. What I'm less sure about is the pan magazine, where the character has their entire thumb stuck in it. There is in fact a hole in the top of the magazine on a Lewis gun. I think we knew that. But if I stick my thumb in it, it doesn't go very far in, just the tip.
Make sure to check out our previous 2 episodes on the guns of Hell Let Loose, and if you like this kind of content, make sure to subscribe as we've got an extensive back catalogue of episodes with Jonathan. Right, let's take a look at more weapons of Hell Let Loose.
Right, well, always good to see a Lee Enfield rifle in a video game of any kind, especially if it's done well, which this one is. Now, something I do notice looking, aiming down sight, but in the real world, that bolt handle doesn't look quite the right shape. I don't know if I can show you that on camera. Might be, it might just show. So the angle looks a little off there. Sights look good to me. It is correctly centered. That's something I've picked up on before, where when you're aiming down sights, sometimes the front sight's in the wrong place, and so your shot would go astray. That's all good. The only other thing I'm spotting here, we've got this very prominent domed screw on the back of the cocking piece. And it's a sort of a keeper screw for this feature here, which you'll struggle to see. Now that is shown as recessed on the cocking piece, and that keeper screw is proud, and I don't believe that's correct. Certainly not on the example we have here. That cocking piece should be flush. This is the level of sheer nitpicking nerdery that I'm having to resort to critique this rifle. Hey, the classic Webley. The load there felt a little bit artificial. We're bringing the round up and we're poking it in with the index finger. Normally you'd hold the round like this or like this, and you'd push it in with the thumb. I've not seen anyone try and push it down with the index finger. Reason being, it's easier to lose control of the round as you offer it up to the cylinder. That said, you can load this thing however you like in theory. You may be familiar with the speed loader system on a revolver, and you may be familiar with the Prideaux speed loader, big plunger type thing that was developed for the Mark VI Webley in the First World War. That was not, as far as I know, a thing in the Second World War. The Mark VI was not the primary sidearm, unless you were in something like the RAF at the time. Nonetheless, I don't believe they had these speed loaders. So it's correct to see single loading of rounds. I'm just a bit unconvinced of the sort of biomechanics of pushing those rounds in with the index finger. Nice head stamps there, which I think are accurate. And certainly we have unfired primers there, which is nice to see.
I don't believe the primers do get dented though.
Yeah, doesn't look like they do. So we have bullets disappearing from cases as they should, but I too have not seen any struck primers. So correct to see them unstruck. Really, we want to see that decal or whatever change to a dented primer. Absolute extra bonus points if the firing pin impression matches that of a Mark VI Webley. Okay, we've got a 1928 model Thompson without the vertical foregrip. Model looks good, textures look good actually. Rate of fire also looks correct. These things do fire at least 900 rounds per minute. On my not very good speakers, the sound effects are lacking a bit of punch.
I mean, honestly, when playing, I thought the sound effects of the Thompson felt a little flat, but I've never shot a Thompson. But it did sound a bit like a wet squib. I mean, we've shot Thompsons. I've watched you shoot a Thompson, and we don't expect video game sound effects to be quite like real life, but there was like a tangible difference. Yeah. Now, obviously, indoors, when you and I hearing that thing go off, it's more concussive and sort of subjectively louder, even with ear defenders on indoors. But still, even outdoors,
And they probably have based this sound effect on the sound of one of these things being fired outdoors. Sometimes you have to cheat the reality to meet the expectation. I'm not saying my expectation is worth more than anyone else's, but having heard a number of these and shot a number of these over the years, it's lacking something. I will say the reload is correct, but it's maybe a little easy. Trying to reach, I have relatively long thumbs, and trying to reach that magazine release with that thumb while maintaining hold on that drum and pulling it out is doable, but it's a little casual there. I think that's probably because video game hands are not human hands. Okay, we've got the ability to either choose different models in game or to upgrade and add a vertical foregrip. So we have the classic 1921 model, 1928 model vertical foregrip there. Most of your 1928A1s, which is what this is saying it is, are not going to have that classic vertical foregrip. They have the straight forend like the later M1 did, but it's not impossible that one wouldn't find its way back onto a gun, perhaps. So very nice to see the boys anti-tank rifle. Details wise, I can't really wrangle this sucker on camera, so you'll just have to admire it from afar. This is exactly the model that we have represented in the game. It's got a sort of a khaki paint overall that's all worn on the edges, which is one of the few times where a real museum gun has looked more video gamey than the one I'm looking at on the screen. So we saw the use of the, I was going to say bipod. It's not really, well, it's sort of a bipod, but it's like a monopod into a bipod. Obviously, in games, these things have to lock onto a fixed point in space. They can't kind of yet realistically interface with sloping damaged surfaces or whatever they would in real life. I'm just happy that we have bipods that function, to be honest. And it seems to handle quite realistically. I haven't sadly ever fired one. The recoil would be significant. The brake helps quite a bit. I think they probably got the amount of muzzle rise there correct. What they can't replicate, of course, is any contusion to your shoulder. Question for you, Dave, because I haven't so far really seen it. How much damage does this thing seem to be doing to tanks and things?
To be honest, I wasn't very good with it. There's a shot where I'm shooting at a tank trying to disable it, and the turret just slowly turns, looks at me, and I'm like, is that looking at me? And then a shell just immediately destroys the position I'm in. But I believe it's more suited for like disabling tracks and systems of a tank rather than fully destroying it. It was nice to see that there was tangible difference between how a rifle like this versus like more explosive munition like a PIAT.
That's all what I would want to hear. So by the time this thing's in serious use, there are still some German tanks around that it can knock out, mission kill or whatever. Panzer III onwards, probably, you're going to struggle. So you are going to be trying to crack a track link, shoot a vision block, or use it for killing people behind cover, which is increasingly what it found itself being used for as it became less useful against armored vehicles. Or, of course, other vehicles, like a Kettenkrad or any kind of, not tank, is going to take serious damage from a 55 boys round. Oh dear, we have a problem with the Bren. So that great big ring-shaped object in front of the magazine, as we see it here, is the magazine catch, just like it is on the boys, which was being used earlier. Here it's not. Here we're ripping the mag out of the Bren without the magazine catch at all, which is not possible. The gun itself is looking pretty good, though. There's that freakish long thumb again, wrapping its way around. To be fair, it's not that freakish. I can replicate that. But of course, what I can't do is rip the mag out of the gun. The way to reload the Bren was heel of the hand, and ideally you keep hold of the magazine and place it on the ground. In an emergency, you can, in theory, semi-AK reload it off the gun. And then you or the assistant gunner rocks in the fresh one. But you've got to operate this catch here. Now, I believe this is purporting to be a Mark II Bren, from what I've seen. Notably has the flip up sight here rather than the great big dial ramp sight of the Mark I as this more conventional integrated sight, of course, with the offset aperture. But yeah, so in terms of barrel length, the body or the receiver, the general look of the thing, I believe they're going for the Mark II Bren. This is a Mark II Bren, which I'm cheating with because it's a sectioned one, which makes it a lot lighter for my puny curatorial frame, because the Bren is a light machine gun, but it's not a light machine gun. Now, if anyone's thinking there are no cartridge cases ejecting from this thing, well, there are, in theory, but they're happening out the bottom. You see that big open bit at the bottom? Well, some of that's been cut away, but there's always enough for the cartridge case to drop out as it's extracted off the face of the bolt. So they end up in a neat pile underneath. You have to be careful not to burn yourself on them. But they don't go flying out off the side, so we wouldn't expect to see them. We might be, I don't know if the model is ejecting cases and we just can't see them from the angle, or if it's a bit fudged by it never ejecting cases. I haven't quite figured that out from the footage. I don't think I'm making this up, but I would have known that was a Lewis gun just from the sound effect. There's something about the noise of a Lewis gun. It's a sort of a flatter tone than a Bren. Even though it's firing the same cartridge at a similar rate, it just sounds different. I'm not sure what it is. Maybe it's that barrel jacket, but I think that they've either done some live audio or this has been faithfully recreated, because that sounds really good. What I'm less sure about is the pan magazine, where the character has their entire thumb stuck in it. There is, in fact, a hole in the top of the magazine on a Lewis gun. I think we knew that. But if I stick my thumb in it, it doesn't go very far in, just the tip. And what that is, in case you're wondering what the hell's going on, is that's the magazine catch. So the smacking of the magazine to seat it, can't remember if it's in the pamphlet, but realistically, you probably would want to do that. It does need some encouragement sometimes. I wouldn't be doing it off to the side like that, though. That's just going to lever on apply leverage and make it even less likely to latch in place. I think what you need to do is hit it directly above where it's mounting. I was very kind about the Bren and its controllability, even firing bursts on the shoulder if you're very skilled. I really wouldn't suggest it with the Lewis gun. It's just so heavy, and front heavy as well. You know, this girder-like bipod hanging off this heavy barrel shroud with a heavy barrel underneath it. I'd be very impressed if anyone's able to fire this thing other than on the bipod. Also, with the rotating magazine, firing it from the hip, which would theoretically be possible, especially with this handy handle here, is going to be more problematic. I don't think there was any doctrine regarding firing this from anywhere other than the bipod, unless it's attached to an aircraft or something. So I think we have a problem here in that firing a PIAT from the hip or the shoulder is a really bad idea. That thing needs to be fired in the prone position with its bipod or monopod firmly planted with a good old tight grip behind it. Yes, it will, firing stuff in the prone feels like you're getting more recoil. At least you're supported by the ground. Firing it standing up, it's gonna rock you. It's gonna shove you back. It's such a heavy weapon as well. You're not gonna be able to keep it in the aim very accurately. I'm not saying nobody tried it. I'm saying it's not a good idea. And if you're thinking, well, it's just like an underbarrel grenade launcher or, a rocket launcher, what's the problem? It's the same sort of size and weight of projectile. Well, yeah, but it's a literal mortar bomb, and it's fired with a literal mortar bomb charge in the bomb. So it has enough recoil to send that on its way, just as though it were a mortar, which it is, and it was used in indirect fire mode as a mortar even. Would you fire a 51mm 2-inch mortar from the shoulder? If you would, then feel free to try it with a PIAT. And very happily, we have the other Lee Enfield. Now, the theatre that we're in here, if we're late enough in the war to be seeing number 4s, we probably ought to be seeing just number 4s and not SMLEs, but can't rule that out. The SMLE was used throughout the war, especially in the Middle East, North Africa. Nice to have them both. It's a game. Let's have both. Do you feel like there's any real gameplay difference between the two, Dave?
Not especially. Do you think part of it is a flavour and variety thing? And especially in a game like Hell Let Loose, where one round is 99% of the time going to send you respawning or waiting for a medic. Yeah, there's tangible, very little difference.
So in theory, one of the major changes with the number 4 was to space this front and rear sights back out again to sort of target distance from each other and make it an adjustable aperture. So in theory, it's slower to bring into the aim. So did you ever feel like if there's someone running across your field of view, this was slower to score a hit with than the SMLE?
No, they felt largely the same. I think, you know, to someone who's played a lot more than I have, that there probably is differences, but I would consider myself a hell let loose layman's. To me, yeah, there wasn't a huge amount of difference.
It's probably not that significant in the scheme of things. You train to use the weapon you've got, and any difference in what they call snap shooting, where you're bringing something up very quick, acquiring the sights quickly, any difference there between a sort of modern rifle iron sight aperture like this has when it's folded down and the open notch sight of the SMLE, which is more like a modern pistol sight, any difference there is going to be pretty slim. You've got a bigger field of view without looking through a hole. Now, of course, what we know from games, and I haven't seen in detail here, is that aperture is usually opened up so that you have a better field of view to acquire a target. So that might factor here as well. It's a classic, and everyone loves to hate. It's the Sten Mark II. Rate of fire seems to go up and down a little bit. I don't know if that's just my brain, but it seems to vary. That's not impossible, but it would require a dodgy batch of ammo because this thing is powered by its ammunition. So you might get a slight rising, falling tone if your ammunition's not been consistently loaded. You'll notice the cocking handle is different. That's fine in principle. There are multiple different models of cocking handle, 5 or 6 on the Sten. That is, I think, period correct, but it's very stubby. That pattern of cocking handle ought to be significantly longer than that. I think the recoil is actually a bit excessive. This thing basically doesn't move, partly because you've got the mass going forward is counteracting subjectively the blast of the shot, or the recoil generated by the shot. So it doesn't really move if you've got a decent grip on the thing, whereas this feels like it's, I mean, I know you have to simulate recoil to make it in any way challenging to use. If it was just a point and shoot bullet hose, it wouldn't be very fun to use, and everyone would just use this instead of anything else up close. But then if you're up close, you probably should be using this and not anything else. On the British side, at least. Super weird. Okay, so we've moved to the Mark V Sten. I haven't grabbed to show you. It basically looks fine, except the cocking handle that was too short on the Sten. So it was about as short as this one when it should have been a bit taller with that hourglass shape to it. This has that pattern of cocking handle, but it's about twice as long as it should be. We have the full grip on there. Now that was used, but very early on it was discontinued because it kept breaking, coming loose, and then when tightened it would crack. So they eliminated it. In fact, the official drawing doesn't even have it on there. So it must have been eliminated quite early on. Not to say that some wouldn't have made it out into the field. We still have a couple here that have them. I also think, and I'm less sure of this because of the angle, but it looked to me like the cooling holes on this handguard, there we are, might well be too big on the game gun, on both guns, I think, on the Mark II and the Mark V. They may have scaled those up because with foreshortening and field of view, they looked far too small. So there might be a good reason for that.
The game features the Sten Mark II and the Mark V, but interestingly, it's based on the theatre that you're fighting. So the British forces in North Africa, the 8th Army, has the Mark II, whereas the Western Front in Europe has the Mark V. Is there any historical precedence for that?
Yeah, so the Sten Mark V being the latest thing, let's say this is like mid 1944, and some have made it out to the front line. Typically, they made it to the Western Front first. Middle East, North Africa, Pacific, but it was also, I guess, logistically difficult to get the latest stuff out there, and maybe it was preferential as well. It's something worth researching, actually, as to how that happens. But you do end up with SMLEs and Mark II Stens in the desert, and the first Mark V Stens are in Europe, you know, as the Allies come back into Europe. So that does sort of fit. All right, guys, thank you for watching. As always, Do pop over to our Royal Armouries YouTube channel, because if you liked my ramblings here, you should enjoy what we do over there. If you can visit our 3 real-world museums here in the UK, please do. We also have various social media outlets and all of that you can check out. But we will see you here on the GameSpot channel, as always, next week.